Orange Pill. Orange Pill. Orange Pill.
Right. You know what? We've got a lot of stuff to cover in this episode of Orange Pill Podcast.
Yeah, definitely. Waiting on it.
Back from travels. And you know how Bitcoin is code and cypherpunks write code, and code is zeros and ones. You know what? Bitcoin is zeros and ones. Fiat is all zeros. So we're going to look at two headlines here, juxtapose these two headlines, and show you why Bitcoin fixes this and why Bitcoin fixes the world. The Venezuelan regime prepares to chop another 6 zeros off the bolivar to try and mask its ongoing collapse. The currency has lost 14 zeros over the last 13 years. Meanwhile, in the US, they're talking about a platinum coin, right? That is going to be face value of 1 trillion so that they could spend more. So I want to look at this headline from economist Paul Krugman, quote, "The dialogue surrounding minting the $1 trillion coin is the most important fiscal policy debate of our times." Of course, I responded to that tweet, Max, with a reminder of the 1998 quote from Paul Krugman, "By 2005 or so, it will become clear that the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machine." So, Max, you see there, you have, first they do that. First they do what the US is trying to do, is add zeros to your money. Then there's too many zeros and they need to subtract the zeros to hide all of the shenanigans that they did in the first place to basically finance all of their programs.
Yeah. The tide of zeros comes in, the tide of zeros goes out. It's a tide of zeros. It's a sea of zeros. It's all zeros. And on top of that is an economy that ends up being worth zero, right? None of these economies add up to anything in terms of value. They all end up descending into war. Essentially, all economies will end up in war if they continue with the zero game.
The absurdity of just like how many zeros your dollar or your bolivar has, like that's somehow going to alter the underlying fundamental economy or the wealth creation. So, to highlight this, I want to say, I think $1 trillion is a little bit Dr. Evil, that like not really all that much. So I have an idea of a new coin I'm going to create. And this coin is going to save not just the US, not just Venezuela, but the whole economy. And I chose the smallest coin I could find physically because I'm not insecure about the size of my zeros. I feel like my zeros are going to be good. So we have 3 possible names, just so you understand what we're having to choose here. And we're going to choose this in our naked spaces later. We're all going to decide on what it's going to be called. So now $1 trillion, a trillion has 12 zeros. A quadrillion has 15 zeros. Those aren't enough because there's how many quadrillion derivatives out there, right? We need something that's going to fix the whole world in this whole fiat scheme. So I have 3 options for you. Max, you could tell us your suggestion, what you think might be the best. But I'm going to go, there's 3. First is sextillion, because sex sells, right? And guess how many zeros it has? 21.
Nice.
So we could make this a sextillion coin.
Nice.
And just call it sex, right?
That sex sells.
Who wants to have sex?
Yeah, that's going to fly off the shelves. That's it.
The other one, okay, this is for our French brethren out there, just because we just got back from Paris. I want to say non-lion, non-lion is and I'm feeling like the reason why non-lion is a good one is it's 30 zeros, but if you pronounce it like in a French way, non-lion, it's like Rene Magritte's "This is not a pipe." The treachery of images, because that's also highlights the treachery of the dollar. That thinking let's add another zero and the economy will boom. Let's take away some zeros and the inflation might stop. Like that's the treachery of money, right? Of paper money. That's what we could have. Non, lion.
Yeah. This is not a deficit. It's Paul Krugman, Magritte.
And he lived in France. I know he was Belgium, but he did a lot of his stuff in Paris. We saw a lot of signs for where he lived and stuff like that. Surrealism, right? So, I mean, we've often talked about how surreal our economic and financial system is at the moment. But the first coin is sextillion, 21 zeros. The other option is nonillion, and that is 30 zeros. The short form for that would be no. No?
No, yes, the no.
No, that's the no. The final option could, it harkens back to the 70s for me. And that is Treachery. It has 42 zeros, but the thing that I like about it is mixes fiat with shit coins, is that you could call it a TRE bag.
Oh, right. Right. No, that's good. Yeah, people would deal that on the street. They would deal you these.
Well, there's only one coin.
These notes.
Like as Francis Coppola would say, there's only one coin. Like how can you, it is like in her world. Like you can't cut it up, you can't sliver it up, right? It just wipes away all the debts and magically saves our economies.
Right.
So you either get sex, no, or a TRE bag. Those are my options for you.
All right. So one coin to rule them all.
I was going to throw this on the ground, and then I was like, wait, this could be worth a nonillion, right? And here I am like...
I mean, I get in trouble for ripping up dollar bills, and you just threw away the entire global GDP times 1,000 or 100,000.
Oh, I saw a really good headline. Jay Powell says that he has no intention of banning Bitcoin.
Yeah, okay, that's right.
Jay.
He has no intention. He has no ability. I think they misspelled intention. They misspelled ability wrong. Somehow it came out looking like intention. He has no ability to ban Bitcoin. But getting back to Paul Krugman, I can't believe this $1 trillion platinum coin is back in the conversation. This was, I think, 10 years ago. This was a discussion. Joe Wiesenthal over at Bloomberg was really hot on this, talking a lot about it. I think Josh Brown at MSNBC was talking about it. This was a big topic of discussion. It came and went. They did not print. Apparently, in the Constitution of the United States, there's a loophole that allows Congress to issue a $1 trillion platinum coin. And so they feel like they need to do this to give the economy the boost it needs to get through this current period of malaise. And I just can't believe that these conversations are had in a serious manner.
Well, that's the thing, is I brought up Rene Magritte, okay? This is not a pipe.
Yeah.
And it isn't a pipe, but it is a pipe, right? It was an image of a pipe, but it was not a pipe. So it was technically correct. Now, it's a similar situation. Is it surrealism, or what would the opposite of surrealism be? Hyperrealism, hyperrealism, something like we need to come up with a word for it, because here they're like the thought that like we have this magic coin,
yeah,
and all we need to do is put another 0 or 2 on it and all our debts will disappear. And you feel like, well, okay, wait, that is literally an absurdity, right? Because there were real goods and services already consumed for the past 50 years that somebody has to pay for. Like, even if you do a blank slate with this, it's an attempt at a blank slate, right?
Yeah.
Like, all of that work has been done. All of those goods and services have been consumed. And this is the confrontation that you have with this new generation who, you know, you need to get them on side to believe in your fictional coins that you add zeros and subtract zeros. Like, you know, it's like the Matrix. You looked over there and you're like, wait, didn't that boulevard just have like 6 zeros on it? Like, what happened to those zeros? It's just like, oh, wait, didn't you have a deficit? Like, where's the debt ceiling? Wait, what's this $1 trillion coin?
Right. Well, Paul Krugman behavior like a serial killer. You know, serial killers like to leave behind little tokens, signatures of their crime.
Jesus.
As maybe a mutilation of the corpse or something, an artifact. And here he is. He wants to leave $1 trillion coin behind as yet latest evidence of his baldashery of serial killing the American economy through his episodic seizures in the pages of the New York Times, spewing the vomitous Keynesian claptrap that has gotten him where he is today, a middle-class, bewildered, bespeckled, bearded nincompoop.
But this is not a pipe. This is not an economy.
No, it's a crack pipe. And there's Paul Krugman huffing on his crack pipe, you know, performing acts of serial killing. And but Bitcoin is here to say, we don't recognize you anymore. It's when I see Paul Krugman in the news or on my timeline, it's like seeing something, an artifact from a time long ago when people talked about these things. And it wasn't completely laughable. You remember this $1 trillion coin is circa 2008. People discussed it in seriousness. At that time, you know, Bitcoin hadn't made the move that it made. Now you look at it and just like, you guys are so messed up in the head.
So I'll relay to you in case you weren't around there. The $1 trillion coin idea actually came about back in like 2008, 9, and 10, right when Bitcoin was being born. So Bitcoin was born at the same time as this other idea that was $1 trillion platinum coin. One has succeeded and one has failed, right? Now, the thing about what I'm trying to compare here with this is not a pipe is that what we have observed for the past year and a half, especially, but certainly since at least 2000 and definitely from 1971, is that they say we, with our own two eyes and our own experience, can look around us and say, this is not an economy. But they tell us, here, take this check, take these zeros at the end of this check, take it, this is an economy. They think the paper is an economy. We can see, we know we can see this because we have things like the tension going on. We have the deplorables. We have the opioid overdoses. We have these things. That is people observing and witnessing and understanding that this is not an economy. And the reason why it can't be an economy is because of the absurdity, talking about absurdism, surrealism, Dadaism of a fiat money system.
Yeah, it's Schrodinger's coin. It's like, is it dead? Is it alive? You open the box, it's really dead. Who knows? The cat's smoking a Gauloise. He's looking at a book of art by Dada, and he's on a skateboard on the Seine. And Notre Dame's on fire, and there's a French person eating a baguette. And that's Paul Krugman's column today in the New York Times. It makes no sense. It's just a succession of non sequiturs put together by a wannabe serial killer who's obviously smoking a crack pipe. And that's who they employ as their number one economist over there at the New York Times, the paper of record. You know, the record that they should be referring to is the record of criminal offenses. That's the record that they have. They've criminally made offenses against the art of journalism and the institution of economics.
So again, this is not an economy. They tell you this is an economy. They say this is Wall Street. These are free markets. These are the free market determining prices. And yet, in fact, this is not the free market because interest rates are rigged. The price of money is rigged. Zeros can be added or subtracted at will. This is not a free market. You could also say this is not money. If you could add and subtract zeros at will and randomly and capriciously, you know, we have a Magna Carta for that. Bitcoin is the Magna Carta of money because it doesn't allow you to be so capricious, random, and just like willy-nilly decide to add a zero, subtract 6 zeros, put on another 30 zeros, and take 5.
Right. Well, it's proof of work versus proof of stake or fiat money, right? So Bitcoin is proof of work, whereas fiat money is simply, there's no work involved. It's proof of model or mark to model, or it's Keynesian mental gymnastics. It's not work. You need work to create the value that is represented in the source code of Bitcoin.
So all the things they say, this is a pipe. No, Magritte was right. This is not a pipe. This is an economy. No, it's not an economy. This is money. No, it's not money. This is a free market. No, it's not a free market. Well, they also, how they're recently they've been saying like Bitcoin uses too much energy. It's destroying the economy. It's destroying the climate. And then you see combining all of those previous money, Wall Street, markets, all of that truth. White House Press Secretary Psaki on oil prices. The U.S. has been in contact with OPEC. So because she's mistaking their declarations or their image of the economy with the economy, and they don't understand the source of the inflation as the money printing that they're doing, because in their minds, they're doing it. This is saving the economy, right? So again, all these confusion in the mind of the surrealist way is they believe we're printing the money to save the economy. So the fact that you're printing the money and it's destroying the economy and destroying price signals, they can't get, right? Either they can't get or they can't see. They can't get it, right? It's impossible for them. So here she's saying the oil prices are rising, just like every single commodity on earth is rising. Everything is rising all around them. But they're going to contact the oil cartel and tell them to increase supply or something.
Yeah, I'm looking for a quote I saw about inflation. And this was done a while ago, and if I can find it. But essentially, they're saying that inflation brings out a lot of illusions, a lot of crazy talk to people justifying the inflation. And this has been true for 100 years or more, that when the inflation kicks in, people start to resort to this insane psychobabble. They're like, oh, we got to call OPEC to get them to change the oil price. Or, hey, let's call the Taliban and get them to accept $85 billion worth of our military equipment in exchange for the hostages. It's like, what the hell are they talking about? They're absolutely brain dead, drug-addled, and they're just mumbling incoherent nonsense. So as I said a few weeks ago, as the inflation kicks in, the mental gymnastics and the contortions and the pretzel logic that we're going to hear from policymakers and economists explaining why the inflation is temporary, transitory, or what causes the inflation is going to get more and more insane. I mean, and it won't stop it. It's intractable. It's cyclical. It's going to be going on now for a while because the U.S. dollar has entered the final phase of its existence. It goes the way of every single paper money scheme for the past 300 years. Zero. That's the zero we need to focus on. The U.S. dollar purchasing power going to zero. Even the British pound's purchasing power has dropped 99.5%. So effectively zero. None of escape zero. It's all going to zero. That's the history of it. The U.S. dollar now, the people who rely on the U.S. dollar, the warmongers and the mass media and the psychopaths in Washington, they're not going to accept this. They're going to look at this and say, this is not a donut hole. This is a donut. I can feed my family with this.
This is a crown for real. And the thing is, these are not elite. These are not your presidents. These are not the institutions. They say on the, along the poster in the museum that they are the museum of the fiat days. They pretend that they have any sort of control, and they don't. So I think this is a perfect moment to add some zeros and ones
Yeah, do it.
to this episode and go into cyberspace and talk to the remnant, Aleks Svetski.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is going to be great. We're going to do a little follow-up interview with one of our favorite Bitcoin people, I'd have to say, without a doubt. I'm always anxious to read the content and tweets of Aleks Svetski. Aleks, welcome back.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Stacy.
Aleks, you're definitely toxic. You're on that toxic end of the toxic Bitcoin maximalist, and we're going to get into that. But first,
apparently,
you know, Max and I are boomer, Generation X. You're millennial. You got to explain to us this notion of the remnant. Your latest piece is called Bitcoiners Are the Remnant. The Masses Don't Matter. And that's the title of your latest piece for Bitcoin Magazine. So what the heck are the remnant?
All right. So the remnant is actually probably language that you guys should be more familiar with than me. So it's biblical terminology, and it was actually Francis Pouliot who first introduced me to the term. So he's got this little really tight group on Telegram, and it's called The Remnant. And it's like sort of, he's in there, Seyfedin's in there, Dave Bradley, there's, Gigi, there's a couple of really tight people in there. And I mean, I kind of sort of insinuated what it meant, right? Like I had this intuition about, okay, so it's like the remaining or the remnant or whatever. So anyway, I never really understood it until we were at Bitcoin 2021, and we're having dinner with Russell Okung, with Francis, with a couple other people, and Francis started talking about it, and he mentioned this essay by Albert J. Nock called Isaiah's Job, and Albert J. Nock, that essay in particular inspired like Mario Rothbard, Ayn Rand, and like all these sort of early libertarian types and ANCAP types. And the premise of the essay is this idea that Isaiah the prophet is told by God to be a prophet of the remnant, not a prophet of the masses. And the difference being that the remnant are kind of they're the 1% who matter. They're the 1% who think. They're not the masses who effectively don't matter, who will not notice the message. And the idea of it is to maintain signal and to speak truth, irrespective of whether it's picked up by everybody. Maybe I should say it this way: to speak the truth, even though it's not going to be picked up by anybody, because it'll be picked up by the few who matter. That's kind of a better way to put it. So, and yeah, reading that for me, that like Francis was talking about the article then, and we're having dinner, we're eating steak with Seyfedin, and he's like, all right, everyone, you need to fucking read this. So obviously I didn't read it until a couple of weeks ago, and I sat down and read it. I was like, holy shit, this is good. It talked to me at a deep level, because I wrote a piece in 2019 called In Support of the Elites. And the premise behind that article was, let's stop calling the parasites elites. Like the word elite to me means, Bruce Lee, Usain Bolt, Nikola Tesla, Steve Jobs, the greats, like the people who changed the world. A parasite like Christine Lagarde is not elite. Like she's retarded. Like if I'm allowed to say that, like she's like, these people are fundamentally not elite, and we should stop giving them that designation. So I wrote this article in 2019. It was a rant about like, fuck average. We need people to be the best they can be. And the people who are parasites, let's not give them the designation of elite. And anyway, so I had this in me, I guess, already, but I just didn't have words for it. So reading Isaiah's Job inspired that, or kind of gave me a framework or terminology via which to view this idea of the 1% who matter. And for me, I think Bitcoiners genuinely are the remnant of this generation of the transformation of the world, I guess.
Right. And where it gets kind of interesting is the opposite view, which is, let's call it mass adoption. So definitely in the technology space, it's you often hear, we need to achieve mass adoption. We need, and Bitcoin is always spoken about in those terms. Metcalfe's law is invoked. The ability of being exponentially growing this type of thing. So this is kind of the opposite idea, the mass adoption. And so what you're getting at here is saying essentially that Bitcoin doesn't need mass adoption effectively, as long as it has selective adoption. So my question is, does that make it different than other technologies before it? I mean, so I guess it would, right? And how does that message resonate?
So here's the nuance. It's not that mass adoption is not going to happen. It's not that everybody's not going to use Bitcoin. It's that, and this is where Bitcoin is not unlike any other transformation in the world. So I make a note in there that any revolutionary technology, phenomenon, change in the world has always been selectively adopted in the beginning. Like, the masses don't matter because the masses don't make the change. They are the laggards. They come after the fact. They're like, I use an analogy, and they're like the force of inertia. The force of inertia is not an initiating force. It's an after effect, and inertia comes later. And inertia is kind of like dumb, deaf, and blind. Like, you push something, and inertia keeps it going in that direction. And the masses are like inertia, so they'll follow through on something, but they're not the initiating force. So when I say selective adoption matters, what I mean is that if we go out and try and dilute Bitcoin to make it sound more friendly, to be friendly to the banks and to be friendly to the government and to be friendly to the shitcoiners and to be friendly to the lemmings, like, it's no longer Bitcoin. That's crypto. So, and a perfect example is this: is like Vitalik wanted to make Bitcoin, more accessible so that it's a fucking world computer or whatever. And, that's not what Bitcoin is. Fuck you. Like, we don't need to, make it so that, retard coders can like use Solidity and write crap code so that, people's money gets lost on, the next Ponzi scheme. Like, that's mass technology. Like, the focusing on the lemmings versus Bitcoin is like, no, we will transform the world fundamentally with a technology that the masses don't understand, but it's so superior that by default, like, the remnant is going to accept it. And I kind of just, to give a bit of a qualifier here, is like, to me, I kind of view the remnant almost in three categories. There's like the 80-20 rule. So if you'd say 80% of people are the masses and 20% of the remnant, then of those 20%, I would say there's 80% of those people are the dormant remnant, and 20% are like the remnant that have realized they're awake. And then inside that 20%, there's another 20%, there's another 20-80 of what I would call radical extreme remnants versus like, general remnants. So, and I think, probably in this podcast here, we've got like the radical remnants. So the 20% of the 20% of the 20%. And we're the ones who then wake up the next piece, and then who wake up the next piece. And by the time the full remnants accepted it, by the time something's got like 20% penetration, at that point, the masses then default. And that's the thing. It's like, if we focus on the 80% of the idiots, we're just going to build fiat. That's all we're going to build. We focus on changing the world, and to change the world, we need to focus on the subset that can see the world differently to what it is today.
Right. So, of course, like, I guess the way to compare it is at the time of the biblical times is that they could have focused on converting every person on earth first, or they could have focused on the 12 apostles. You get the 12 dudes who are like, understand what you're talking about, Christ, and then they could go spread the message over the next few hundreds of years. And now, yeah.
But see, also that there's this whole thing about, why did Jesus speak in parables? Jesus spoke in parables, and most people didn't understand what the fuck he was talking about, except for the people who listened for that signal. And they're the ones you want, because they're the people who actually care and who want to see something change, and who will then take that message onwards. So it's the difference between signal and noise, right? The masses are kind of attracted and distracted simultaneously by noise. The remnant seeks signal, and the remnant can sniff when something is noise versus when something is signal. And that's what they're attracted to.
So, I mean, that time, these biblical times, were also during the time of the late stages of the Roman Empire, right? And we're at this similar point in time in the American Empire, which many say is the greatest empire since the Roman Empire. in terms of its projection of force. And it's decaying in a very similar way. So it seems interesting, the comparison, these cycles that do happen. And we're going to get to your tweet where you're basically saying this Bitcoin destroys all cycles, is that, the Christianity spread because of the Roman roads, which was the technology that helped the Roman Empire advance. The same thing with the United States Empire. It built the infrastructure of the internet through which then its ultimate demise comes, or the next step. I mean, did Bitcoin kill the empire of debt, or was it the empire of debt that destroyed itself?
Oh, so is that last bit a question? I don't know. That's the beauty of a complex system, is it's both and it's none. Like it's all of it simultaneously. But yeah, I would agree. There is some analogies. Do you want to get into the idea about like the cycles being broken right now? Do you want to save that?
Let's get into that, because this is another topic that really interests us, the Kardashev scale. And that, because you recently tweeted, okay, I'll read it. Bitcoin doesn't break all your models, but it breaks all the cycles. This ain't just some random fourth turning shit. This is the transition from a type 0 or type O civilization to a type 1. So elaborate on that.
So the idea here is, so I was on a podcast with like Laser Hodl and Mark Moss and Untapped Growth and Liberty Blitzkrieg. So it was called Fuck Your Great Reset. It was a hilarious podcast. And in there, like, Mark and Laser Hodl and all these people, and, they're all well known for discussing these cycles, like, the fourth turning, and then there's the longer technology time scale, and then the other cycle, and the debt cycle, and this cycle, and that cycle. And my comment to that was, I said, look, what we've done as humans since the discovery of fire and so fire was kind of like the first energy transformation mechanism that a bunch of apes fucking figured out. And with fire, we're able to cook food, shortened our intestine, and that allowed energy to be used differently by the body. It helped us form our prefrontal cortex. We became sentient beings and we became intelligent. So fire was the first big transformation. And since then, we've sort of had like Homo sapiens, and we're still Homo sapiens now. Like the next stage will be Homo Bitcoinicus, and like, everything that came there'll be before Bitcoin and after Bitcoin. So, BB and AB, right? Like that's sort of the time frames of humanity. And all of the stuff that we try and discuss today, or view humanity through, is like these lenses of debt cycles and fourth turning cycles, generational cycles, historical cycles, technological cycles, is all us attempting to make sense of the fact that there is a general flow, and that there is these sort of tendencies toward skewing the money, power concentration, centralization, fragmentation, breakup, blah blah blah, and all this sort of stuff. It happens. And my argument was that on a Bitcoin standard, because money, like the mechanism or the medium via which we measure human action, energy, time, and scarce resources, like that is put outside of the hands of any individual, organization, state, group to control. Like it becomes a physical law of the universe. All of a sudden, it transforms everything. We don't have this bullshit debt cycles anymore. We don't have these sort of retarded, generational cycles where, our kids or the kids become morons, like, because you can't do it. Like the corrective mechanism with Bitcoin and the feedback loop is too short. Like right now in the world, and the world that we have lived in for thousands of years, you can perform actions and you can create economic frauds or lies by printing money or socializing the losses, and pulling all these weird levers to make it such that you don't know whether the action is good or bad. And it's like flying a plane with no instruments or fraudulent instruments, right? So the mountain is coming, and in the fiat world, like the altimeter is saying pull up, and you're like, oh, I have a solution for this problem. I'll remove the altimeter, like, and then you crash the plane into the fucking mountain. Whereas Bitcoin, the feedback loop is instant, and you can't remove the feedback loop. It'll fucking tell you to pull up, and there's no way of lying to yourself. So because of that feedback mechanism, what happens is on the bad behavior is corrected very quickly, and good behavior compounds and really, really compounds. That mechanism, I think, is going to transform the world more than we know. And it will remove a lot of the cyclical effects that have been defined by debt cycles, generational cycles, technological cycles, and everything. Like, we transform into something else beyond Bitcoin. And I'm not talking transhumanism like those fucking retard globalists are trying to talk about. Like, I'm talking about we root action, decision-making, energy, human and natural resources into physical law, and we can no longer play a fraudulent game, which means we remove wastage, we correct bad behavior quickly, we compound good behavior, and it changes everything. So I'm actually going to be writing, like, my next big piece is going to be for Bitcoin Times #4, and it's called Fire, Bitcoin, Teleportation. So it's this idea that they're going to be the three big discoveries. When we look back 10,000 years from now, the three big discoveries were fire, that transformed us into Homo sapiens; Bitcoin, that was the next energy transmission mechanism; and then teleportation helps us get from galaxy to galaxy. But they're the three things. Like the internet, whatever, it's a nice piece of Bitcoin. Electricity, it's a nice thing about Bitcoin. But it was Bitcoin is the discovery. So anyway, that's kind of where my thoughts are. So the cycles, they're all broken after Bitcoin. So there's a before and an after. And that is how we get to a type 1 sort of civilization, because that's how we go forward. Without that, a sentient species will blow itself up. Like, this is how we get through the great filter.
Right. So the feedback mechanism and the latency in that feedback, as you're describing it, is something that people experience, humans experience all the time, and it causes some problems. If you look at nature, for example, and let's take an example like starlings in the skies, and you see those great murmurations where there's thousands of starlings and they're flying in complete synchronization. There is no feedback mechanism. They simply have somehow achieved a state of unification of mind, of purpose, even though they're all separate birds. So is that where this is going? Something, is that what it might look like going forward?
I don't know. I think it's fundamentally impossible for us to, we can hypothesize, and, maybe the fact that individual behavior corrects much quicker, then as a result, compounding that, to the collective means that, the inherent madness of crowds actually functions as opposed to blows itself up. Because at the moment, what we've got is no feedback mechanism at the level of the individual. And when you compound that up, you actually get complete madness of crowds, where instead of this beautiful starling movement, like what nature has, you get a tragedy of the commons. It's like we've completely fucked it up.
Right. So to follow up a little bit on that. So in nature, we see all the time, let's call it a lack of a feedback mechanism. We see organic, instantaneous.
A lack? Do you mean?
Sorry?
Do you mean a lack, or do you mean a lack of a feedback mechanism, or do you mean a core feedback mechanism? Because I would argue in nature, like, feedback mechanisms occur all the time, and they sort of happen in live action. They're not covered up like an animal. It has these sensors. Like, it's not drugged up. For example, when it hears a noise, an animal is really alert to it. Or if you slap an animal in the face, like, it'll bite you back. So the feedback mechanisms are raw and real, whereas we've drugged ourselves into submission, printed out ourselves into oblivion. Like, we've done all these things to eliminate feedback mechanisms, and as such, we can't make appropriate decisions. So I don't know. Maybe I didn't explain the.
Yeah, no. It's just something to ponder here. So in the feedback mechanism that you do have in nature are instantaneous, to the point where they kind of algebraically remove time from the equation. There's no existential crisis in nature. Whales and dolphins and birds and trees are not sitting on a stump thinking about, maybe I should grow another root. Who would I disturb by this? It just happens in a real time. Time seems completely different in nature because it's not an abstraction. Whereas with humans, time is an abstraction. So now returning to the Bitcoin protocol, every 10 minutes, everything is entirely synced up in a way that mimics nature, and that feedback mechanism is reduced to a 10-minute frame rate. In a nature, it seems like it's reduced to a frame rate of very, very close to zero. So the question is that, does this mean that because two things seem to be going on simultaneously. The Bitcoin and the remnant, as you describe it, seem to be getting, quote, back to nature. But at the same time, the fiat money world seems really determined to destroy the world in which we are living so that it can no longer support human life. And these two rails, these two directions are happening seemingly at the same time. Like there's a race to see who wins. Will it be the fiat money crowd that is really, at this point, is obvious to many folks that their end game is extinction? That's their end game. Or is it Bitcoin and the remnant who seem to be focused on how do we simply, take that evolutionary quantum leap we need to avoid that, right? Is that one way to frame this?
It is. So I would argue, so tying this back to the whole Kardashev scale, is that, this idea that there's other sentient species out there in the universe is probably accurate. And then I would argue that every sentient species has to go through this. They have to discover a mechanism to cooperate. They have to discover a mechanism to communicate, to do things, to build abstractions. And the mechanism via which they do that is also money. And then they need to go through the process of, they start with promises, then they start with rocks and shit like that. Then they discover a scarce metal and, they sort of emerge, and it's the money that allows them to advance as a species. You can't advance as a species, as a sentient species, mind you, without money. It doesn't happen. But what will inevitably happen is that species will discover fiat money. And that's a necessary part of the evolution, because what you have to do is you have this tendency as a species to make the money more efficient. And initially, fiat money was an attempt to make gold more efficient, obviously to make it more divisible and portable, right? But obviously, the incentives of money being the transmission medium or the communication medium that binds all human action, it is, the incentive is to co-opt that. So I think all sentient species have to go through this fiat phase in their journey to discover energy money. And should they discover energy money in time before they turn themselves into a globalist gulag, before they nuke themselves, or before an asteroid hits the planet, they have the opportunity to transition into the next phase of evolution, which is a species whose morals, principles, action, behavior is rooted in reality, and therefore they have efficient use of energy and time. And then that allows them to advance technologically to the point where, they don't blow themselves up, they don't turn themselves into a gulag, and arguably have the ability to, make sure that the asteroid doesn't hit the fucking planet. So I think maybe very few sentient species get there, and we now have a chance because we have Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the energy money that a sentient species has to discover.
So when the US and other nations spend billions of dollars on looking for other sentient beings out in the galaxy, they focus on energy. They look for how much energy a planet is consuming to see whether or not there are sentient beings there. So it is interesting that in our fiat world, we're trying to reduce our energy it seems counterintuitive to what they themselves as the so-called, they define themselves as the elite, that they're seeking in the rest of the world. But in terms of these cycles, one thing that you do notice is like phrases like, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, right? And so we were just comparing the situation of the United States Empire to the Roman Empire. And there are similarities between the American Empire and all other empires, at least some degree of it. And it seems that if you don't know that history, you're doomed to repeat it. One thing about Bitcoin is it's immutable, and you can't go back in time and change the history. And that
Totally.
has been something that is a feature of human societies for the last few thousand years, whether it's clipping coins, blank slates, wiping the history away, totalitarianism, which really started to emerge once we got to, bigger societies, like the Germans turned to it, the Soviets turned to it, the totalitarianism of trying to erase history. And of course, Orwell was there and did do an amazing job at cataloging and chronicling what totalitarianism looks like. And there are a lot of features in today's world that looks like that, where we have to alter the meanings of words, history, and stuff like that. So Bitcoin, in a way, makes it impossible to forget history.
Yes. And this is another one of those examples of we don't know the ramifications of that long term. And like when you can't do that, when you remove, because the tendency to gain an advantage over another is always going to exist. We're competitive, like nature is competitive as well, right? So nature is looking for an advantage all the time. And we are natural beings. So we're always looking for a way to outcompete and gain an advantage. But when Bitcoin removes the ability to gain an unfair advantage like that and places, again, money is that technology via which resources, time, energy, and human action are measured. Like when it moves that out of all of our hands, then all of a sudden, like it creates a competition that is not destructive. It creates a competition that is productive. It drives humanity forward. And then you layer that with this reality that you can't change the past. So you can't get a fraudulent advantage by, erasing or deleting or changing, meanings and deleting words and all this sort of stuff. You get a pretty compelling type of society. And this is where I would argue again, it's like, I was speaking to Mark Moss yesterday, actually, and I said, we're kind of, us drew the short straw in this Bitcoin evolution, because I think this 10 years is going to be the transitory phase. It's going to be messy. It's going to be ugly, but, Bitcoin is sort of like breaks the old system and, it lays the roots for the new system. The next 10 years will be the laying the foundation of Bitcoin as the standard. And that it's only the generation after that, so 2050 onwards, that our children's children, or whatever it's going to be, our children, they're actually going to first get the chance to build on the foundation. And the building on the foundation will outpace any technological advancement that we as humans could have possibly imagined. Like, because it'll be compounded. And again, bad behavior, bad allocation, resource allocation, bad investment, all that sort of stuff will correct very quickly. You can't socialize it. And it'll move human action towards like this ultimate, real reinforced compounded growth of stuff that makes sense, that solves real problems. And yeah, like it's the world will be completely different in 30 years, like beyond our wildest imaginations, purely because of, before Bitcoin, after Bitcoin. And we've got the messy part, but we're also lucky enough to we'll be designated as the founding fathers of, the type 1 civilization of humanity.
Right. So getting back to this idea of a feedback mechanism and how we see that in nature and how we see that in humans and how that relates to Bitcoin. So the feedback mechanism in nature and in humans is based in large part on fear. People are fearful of things, and that tends to inform their decision making and how they act amongst their peers and in society. Certainly in nature, fear drives, fear of hunger, fear of lack of shelter drives a lot of what we see in nature. So in this type 1 civilization you're describing in a hyper-Bitcoinized world, does the base feedback mechanism that's been informing nature since the beginning, does it have a switch in polarity? Do we go from feedback based on fear to feedback based on love?
Feedback from fear is extraordinarily important, because like if you don't have feedback from fear, like this is part of where I think some of the fallacies in the world are today. It's like this idea that don't be afraid of printing too much money because the government will bail us out, right? So they're trying to remove things like fear that are perfectly natural. Like fear exists in nature because it's been a mechanism for survival. Now, if you create like if everything is like purely rooted in just fear, then you have a pretty shitty civilization. So it needs to be a component, and I don't think it'll ever go away, because it, helps us avoid doing stupid things. Like, you need the feedback mechanism of fear not to walk off a cliff, right? Because that's really dumb. And if you don't, like, if you remove that from a human, like, we'll all be lemmings walking right off the cliff. Like, so that needs to be there. Like, we need feedback mechanisms from love to fear to anger to, to passion to drive to all of these sorts of things. It's not about subduing any of them. It's about using them, and not numbing ourselves. This is why, like, I hate everything from antidepressants. Like, for me, like, fiat money printing is the economic equivalent of injecting yourself with, or popping pills to the point where you're so numb that you don't have a way to interact with the world, properly. So I think, yeah, that's my answer to the question. Is fear doesn't go away, but it becomes useful again, because we're not. The fear is real where it needs to be real, and that's the thing.
Okay, so on this type 1 civilization, I want to go a little bit into that, because you mentioned the 3 great discoveries looking back tens of thousands of years will be fire, then Bitcoin. Between there came gold, and humans discovered gold. We used gold, and then in like 700 or 600 BC, we had the Lydia coin, which was the very first ever state use of gold. Okay. We're at the moment right now in hyperbitcoinization of the very first ever state use of Bitcoin as legal tender. They obviously aren't the ones stamping it and giving it legitimacy. But we had the Lydia coin, followed by the florin almost 2,000 years later, which we believe at least partly resulted in the Renaissance. So there is this relationship between money and power and advancement, enlightenment, becoming closer, growing from hunter-gatherers to organizing societies and collecting knowledge and enlightenment, and advancement. So, like, what changes between now and all the history that we could look back on? Like, what does a type 1 civilization look like compared to the type O or 0 that we've been in?
Okay, so I want to pull on a couple threads there. So first of all, is like, complexity requires feedback loops and communication lines, right? So nature is a complex system, and it has multitudes of feedback loops and communication lines that we don't even understand, right? And we have, as human beings, like, in order to cooperate, we've created, like, our ultimate transmission medium is money, but we've just had poor money along the way. Like, money exists as this metaphysical thing all the time. The only difference, the only thing that changes about money is the mechanism, like the object we use or the tool we use to represent the metaphysical thing that is money. Money is like this fabric that permeates all of human existence anyway. Like, it is something that we could arguably mentally hold in our heads. Like, if we had a supercomputer in all of our minds, we could probably track the behavior, the energy, and everything that everybody does. But that's not how we as human beings or sentient species are built. So as a result, we need a energy transmission, a time transmission mechanism to allow us to cooperate. So, and that's how we build complexity in society. That's based on the assumption that we want to have more than, 1,000 people on the entire planet, right? Like, if we had 1,000 people on the entire planet and they were spread out, you don't fucking need money, because we're not trading. We're going out and, we're all a version of Robinson Crusoe ourselves. So money has never changed. Money is always exists. It'll exist from the beginning of time till the end of time. So that'll always be there. It's the object that we use as money changes. And even though we discovered gold, and, like, my thing about coinage is it's not so much that it's state used. It's like coinage had a purpose, and coinage was just standardization. That was the use case for coinage, because people didn't walk around carrying scales to measure how much gold they had in order to, value a good or service. It was like the standardization. enabled efficiency so that you could create more complexity. You could make more abstractions and society could become larger. So that's what coinage provided. And again, fiat initially provided that, or at least gold-backed promissory notes provided that, because they were still rooted in something scarce, right? Gold, but they made money more efficient, and as a result created more abstraction and allowed for more complexity. And we had the Renaissance, right? So we had all these advancements in money. As money gets more functional, and it gets as it becomes better across all those desirable attributes, divisibility, portability, account, scarcity, et cetera, society gets better. But there's a point at which money becomes perfect. Money maps time and energy, and we've reached that point. We've discovered Bitcoin. So now money is perfect. So we have no more latency. We have no more fuzziness in the signal. So that energy transmission mechanism via which human beings cooperate and society is able to be complex is now perfect. There's no deviation. There's no loss of fidelity across it. Like, you can't change Bitcoin. Like, one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. No one can get control to, deviate it to their advantage, etc. So that the ramifications of that mean now we have perfect money, we have perfect information, we have perfect fidelity in terms of transmission. What can we do with that? Again, I find it hard to answer what the society will look like beyond that change. But again, like the threads that I can pull on and that I can guess is, maybe something that's partially reminiscent of like the Renaissance 1.0. Like I've called Bitcoin the Renaissance 2.0, a couple times, but I even think that that's a really small designation for what Bitcoin really represents. I honestly think it's a complete transformation in the type of civilization. It's not just the Renaissance. Like a Renaissance is the idea that, we had the Romans, and then we had the Dark Ages, and then we had a revival of prosperity. Like this isn't just going to be a fucking revival. This is going to be a complete shift where we have perfect money. We got there. Hallelujah. Now we can really build. Now we can really figure out fusion. We can figure out energy transmission across large distances. We can do the real interesting shit that we were too busy wasting 95% of our energy with poor money beforehand. Like today, like I was explaining this to my sister the other day about, the whole environmentalism and all this sort of stuff. And I used the example of how money is supposed to measure time, energy, blah, blah, blah. But because we can't measure it and we have no feedback mechanism and we're flying a plane without instruments, we're flying not only in the wrong direction, but we're fucking wasting all the resources. We don't know what we're doing. So I would argue that 95 to 99% of everything that we do as human beings today is wasted. And as a result, we've got energy shortages, we've got fuel shortages, we've got all this shit. Like we can barely sustain a couple billion people on the planet. Whereas post hyperbitcoinization, where you have minimal waste, I think the world could probably sustain 100 billion people, maybe 200 billion people. Like how much of the planet is uninhabited? We'll terraform. So maybe this is my answer to what society looks like. We'll terraform the world. We'll inhabit the entire freaking world. We won't have any energy shortages and stupid petty things like starvation, etc. We'll have 1 million cities instead of 200 moron countries. Everything will be customer service sort of driven, and there will be a tendency towards advancement. That's a very different world. Now it will have its own problems in its own jurisdictions, but the quality of problems, so I got this one from Tony Robbins, is like problems never go away. It's only the quality of problem that changes. And you want to have a better quality of problem. Like when you're a millionaire, you have a different problem, which is you're trying to change the world or make a dent in the universe, or whatever you're doing, like doing a deal on a real estate deal, etc. A lower quality of problem is I can't, pay for my child's education. And even lower quality of problem is I can't buy food today. So we always have problems. We're just going to increase the quality. So I think type 1 civilization, 10 times more humans on the planet, easy to sustain. We unlock energy in ways that were never sort of dreamed of before. And we have much higher quality of problems that we're dealing with, as opposed to the petty shit today, which is we can't feed people.
Right. Well, we are the remnant, I guess. Now I understand it all, and I'm ready.
You are enlightened.
I'm ready to be even more toxic, not less toxic.
Yeah, I want to wear sandals and be more toxic.
speaking of the toxic thing, I just want to just sort of say, like, I was on with Dennis Porter the other day, and I was just explaining to him this whole shit show that's happened after my bloody article. And I was like, look, toxicity is not something that can be given. It's only something that can be interpreted. Like if I go up to a tall dude and say, you're a fucking midget, like he's going to look at me and laugh at me. It's like, so like toxicity is a terminology used by someone who either doesn't like the incoming thing. So like the best example I think is Bitcoin is toxic to the fiat system. It's toxic because it's fundamentally different and it subverts it. So when someone says someone is toxic, it's like they're challenging them and they don't align. And genuinely and generally speaking in Bitcoin, Bitcoiners who are toxic, there is either a grain of truth or a large kernel of truth in what they're pointing out. And people don't like that. I mean, the toxicity kicked out Roger, Vitalik, Taleb, Andrees, Gavin Andrews, like all of the shitheads were voted out through toxicity, quote unquote toxicity.
And the toxicity drew in Michael Saylor. He says
Exactly.
That's the reason why he came in. He was
good point. Yeah, exactly right.
So like all these people whinging and whining, well, they can go fuck themselves. Like what kind of like, Udi and his little, like I call Udi the troll who tries to troll the trolls because he wants to prove that he's a better troll than the trolls. It's literally Udi's like entire existence can be summed up in that.
It's a trolls all the way down.
That's it. It's like literally trolls all the way down. And that's all he's trying to do. So like his idea that he's going to set up some fucking Avengers to like remove the toxicity. Good luck, bro.
Well, good luck with you. You've got this amazing app, Amber app. A load of our people in our Orange Pill Podcast Telegram group use it, all our Australians.
Thank
but
you.
Is it available all around the world?
No, but next week we're launching in the US. So finally, I've been talking about this shit for ages. So next week we're available across 44 states. And obviously I'm biased, but Amber is the best mobile experience for dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin. And on Amber, you can auto buy the dip. So this is me doing a commercial, but like we got some cool features that other DCA apps don't have. So like you can literally on Amber set up if Bitcoin drops 4% in 24 hours, buy me this much. You can go to sleep, you can go do whatever you want, and it'll buy you the damn dip. And we're building a funny button now called Buy the Schiff. So like every time Peter Schiff tweets about Bitcoin, you can ask the app to buy you some Bitcoin. So it's like we're going to gamify accumulation, and it'll be all from the palm of your hand. We're doing some cool stuff with it. So
Buy
I
the
suggest
Schiff.
everybody
That's a
check
lot
it
of
out.
fun. Yeah, the Buy the Shift button. That sounds really good. That's and we know historically that's always been a great time to buy it.
Exactly. Imagine just trolling. Like I want to create a whole army of trolls that just troll Peter Schiff and just say, I just bought the Schiff every time. Like we'll create an automation that'll automatically tweet from your phone every time you bought the Schiff, and we will like pump this thing. It'll be hilarious.
Well, he's blocked me, so I can't even troll him with this. But
What?
Thanks for joining us,
What,
Alex.
because he's got a micro penis?
Yeah!
right.
You won the Orange Pill Podcast Award.
Yay.
Well, that was really good. And remember, we're going to talk further about this in our live, all nude Orange Pill Podcast Toxic Bitcoin Maximalism space over on Twitter. If you have a Twitter account, just join it. If you go to Stacy Herbert on Twitter, you'll find the spaces right there. And we're going to talk further about the remnant. We're also, remember, going to be totally nude. And while naked, we're going to discuss sex, non, or TRE BAG. Which one you want my new coin to save the world to be called?
All right. This sounds good. This is all happening on Twitter.
A TRE BAG could save the world in a way, right? If everybody just got stoned and loved each other.
Well, it's one of the possibilities. The other two possibilities are certainly in contention. I don't want to tip the hand of try to influence the voting on this. Let's see what the people want.
Well, actually, it could be the opposite, because think about it. The boomers destroyed the world, right? And it all started with a TRE BAG back in the 70s, the summer of love, 60s, 70s. And like, what happened? It was like an orgy gone horribly wrong. Everybody got angry and jealous, and they turned into Karens and vicious and vindictive and stabbing each other in the back. And and stabbing the next generations in the back, stealing their wealth. It was just like they became hoodlums, right? It was a gateway drug.
Yeah, that definitely. The baby boomers all became hoodlums, and they're all running around psychopathically destroying everything in their sights. That's unquestionable.
Right. So, you know, in the top of the show, we were talking about the Bolivars taking, how many zeros did I say off?
Oh, 6, I believe. They're taking 6 zeros.
They chopped
off.
6 zeros
That's
off.
one zero every, about a zero a year for 13 or 14 years. That's their average.
Yeah, they've lost 14 zeros over the last 13 years.
Yeah, that's almost a zero a year.
That's a zero a year.
Yeah.
The U.S. is eagerly trying to add some zeros to it, right? I mean, everybody's worth. How many millionaires? How many billionaires? Like I read something like they were like, I don't know, say 20 billionaires in America, in 2019. And now there's like 200. So
there's 60 million millionaires.
Yeah. So it's like 60 million millionaires.
Yeah.
That's like, almost a third of the population, a fourth of the population, 25% of the population.
I think that's globally. And maybe, but I remember that number is definitely up 50% in the last 15 years.
Yeah. But even in the last year and a half.
Yeah.
Just the year and a half. That's all I fucking care about right now. Because that is the year where I talked about in the last microdose that something happened in March of 2020 that changed. It was like a vibration, a murmuration went out across the world instantly. And everybody understood something deep inside what happened, because that's when you saw Paul Tudor Jones come into Bitcoin. Then you saw Michael Saylor. Then you saw like all these, philosophers, Bitcoiners, like Orange Pill, Honey Badger, like the biggest brains suddenly emerged and became so much more articulate and interesting and profound, right? They had so much more. It's like,
how do you know that's not the simulation, though? That you're just projecting that out of your own brain?
Well, it's kind of like, Bitcoin started, whether you want to say October 31st, 2008, when the white paper was published, or January 3rd, 2009, when the first Bitcoin was mined. Okay, you hit the start button, and then you remember how old computers, it used to take a while for it to start up?
Oh, sure.
And then there's a moment where, boom, it's on. That seemed to be that moment in March of 2020. It's just like, Bitcoin was started up. It was that little tiny dot that used to be on the screen, and then it would go like, ooh, and the ball was rolling.
Yeah. But how do you know you're not projecting it out of your mind? How do you know?
We're all projecting everything around us, right?
So these people that are coming in, like Paul Tudor Jones and stuff, that's just a script you wrote for those avatars to come into your mind play.
Well, it's zeros and ones.
Yeah. You're scripting it in your mind.
All the stuff that makes sense is zeros and ones. Fiat money is just all zeros. You can't write code with all zeros. Like, you need some ones in there.
Fiat money is all zeros. That's for sure. And this getting to be more zeroific.
Well, they're literally all zeros, right? Like how we used to, I don't know if people still say you're a zero.
Well, I know, I've been tracking this over the years. The cost of producing a penny is about 1.8 cents. So that's pretty, emblematic of how the U.S. economy works. They lose 87 cents or more on every cent they produce.
The other thing about the remnant that is interesting, and we're going to go into this more in our all nude chat over at Spaces. Like, in order to join, by the way, you have to make sure you're naked. You can't be wearing any clothes. You got to go in there totally nude, at least brain nude, right? You have to go in there.
Brain nude?
Naked.
Okay. Brain nude.
Brain nude. But the thing about the remnant, okay, so you're basically, there's a matter of urgency, and like, you don't need to convince the 8 billion on Earth. You already have the convinced. They're already there. The remnant. Those are the ones that get it. Like, they already understand. They could read it. They could see the signals. They can understand it. So we've already got that. And of course, Satoshi Nakamoto, who this is quoted all the time. If you don't believe it or you don't get it, I don't have time to try to convince you. Sorry.
Right. That's very toxic.
That's toxic.
That's a toxic statement.
Yeah.
Right. You don't need, the thing about shitcoins is that they push this idea that, well, we need, it's easier. It's for adoption. It's easier for some reason. But the fact is you don't need that. That's actually not a feature.
First of all, they think that you need to be nice to people so that you can have more adopters. Which is the classic sign of a con, is like, it's not the product itself. The product sells itself. Bitcoin is the money, the perfect money. It sells itself. And think of all the advertising industry. What are they pushing? Junk food, stuff laden with, plant oils and stuff like that, and processed food. That's where they have to spend millions and millions of dollars with really big smiley faced people who are on the television telling you how they care about you and how you could have your teeth just as big and white and awesome as them and have a huge cock if you buy their processed food, right?
And that's just for the women.
And that's right. But the fact is that doesn't matter. And you were also saying that, in terms of adoption, they could, part of that whole con is printing up the money and giving it to you. Like $1 trillion coins can rescue you. You could have all the free rent. You could have free education. You could have free healthcare. All we need to do is print up this coin, and it's going to save everybody.
Yeah. It's an obvious scam. But I mean, we wouldn't have anything to compare it to. That's the thing, that Bitcoin gives people a way to compare what people are talking about in terms of $1 trillion coin. In a vacuum, without anything to compare it to, you would be more gullible to accept that maybe this makes sense. But when you compare it to what's been going on for Bitcoin now, heading into its 12th and 13th year, it becomes more obviously a scam. And so because it's the Bitcoin standard and the hardest money ever, and what you see happening around the world. So this is what the money printers didn't count on this. And they still are so incredibly tone deaf when it comes to trying to push their fiat money schemes and scams versus Bitcoin. And we know, therefore, we are very early in the cycle, right? So people say, oh, Bitcoin at 40 or 50,000 is expensive. Well, not compared to 1 million or 5 million, it's not expensive. And that's, where we're headed, because you've got $400 trillion worth of worthless fiat money garbage floating around the system, or multiple quadrillions worth of worthless derivative products that have no resale value. They're unbacked and they're just zeros, on somebody's imagination. It's called mark to model, right? When Goldman Sachs reports the end of the quarter, they say our book of assets is worth X, Y, and Z based on our model. Okay, how do you calculate this model, Goldman Sachs? Well, that's proprietary. We couldn't tell you that because otherwise it would be, anti-competitive. We don't want our competitors to know how we do our value at risk, our VAR, our mark to model. The truth is that there is no model. It's just like Lehman Brothers, Dick Fold before the 2008 global financial crisis would move his liabilities around every quarter and hide it from the regulators so he wouldn't have to report them. It's just complete shadow puppetry. That's just puppet shadows. That's it. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. There's nothing there.
This is not an economy.
It's nothing
This
there.
is not money. And, the other interesting thing in the conversation that I felt with Aleks Svetski was when he was talking about how the more advanced economies and societies and complex societies is there's a level of abstraction that happens to simplify things, right? So, a dollar will represent a unit of the economy and a unit of gold and things like that. But we kind of seem to have the reverse abstraction with a lot of what you see, like language all across the Anglo-Saxon economies for sure, but definitely in America right now is like when to say woman or he or she or things like that. But now it was just one word, right? That was one simple word. And now it's like person with a vagina. It's like several words, right? To explain one thing.
It's bureaucratic bloat. It's bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a cancer, and it kills economies and it kills countries. That's why communism and socialism, that's one of the reasons they never work, is because they become too bureaucratic. In the US, it's not, you got bureaucratic bloat. You know who wrote brilliantly about this was David Graeber.
That's true.
And he
That's
wrote
true.
about this
bullshit
jobs and all this type of thing. And he's no longer with us, sadly.
Well,
But
this is not a pipe. This is not a woman. This is like people don't know. We've crossed the absurd. Like having all zeros and random numbers and random zeros added to the back and front of our currency randomly has destroyed all the price signals, caused
right.
an
Well,
economy
like
which is not an economy.
in capitalism, one of the simple tests to establish value is, okay, what can I sell this for?
Yes.
Okay, now in a communist or socialist country, that price is dictated by the state, right? So you don't really have the market functioning. There's no price signal. So, you don't, the price of a potato is fixed by the state, and that's the price of potatoes. Okay, in a capitalist economy, there's like, okay, what does the market value my potato at? And that's the price. Okay, so what are things priced at in the American economy? Well, interestingly, starting about 15 years ago in earnest, we had a situation where the banks on Wall Street, which are now the biggest component of the economy as a percentage of GDP, had a lot of stuff to sell, but nobody would buy it. And it was worth ostensibly, on their books anyway, hundreds of billions, if not a few $1 trillion. Had they been forced to sell those items on the open market, then America would have undergone what it should have undergone, which was a complete insolvency and the ability to restart and maybe survive. But instead, guess who showed up to buy all that junk? The Federal Reserve Bank. And even though it had a zero resale value for these derivatives and subprime junk loans, the central bank said, we'll give you 100 cents on the dollar. So now the central bank's balance sheet is now at almost 10 trillion, stated. But they also have a lot more that they're not talking about. And you add that to the global central banking system that's done quantitative easing. That's what they call it. So now you've got in excess of global GDP, let's call it $100 trillion. There's probably several quadrillion dollars worth of worthless garbage on their books that they say is worth 100 cents on the dollar that has no resale value. If a Martian showed up and said, I would like to buy planet Earth, and you send over the spreadsheet, they would say, well, you have a negative value of 7,500 gazillion dollars. I'm not going to give you a penny for this planet. And they would be an accurate representation of what the economy is worth.
But again, in this last few moments here, I want to say that fits in exactly with how I started the show with this is not a pipe. This is not an episode of Orange Pill Podcast. Okay, we'll say that. But the fact is, this is not a pipe. What Max is talking about is those Goldman Sachs sold these CDOs. This is not a CDO. In fact, what they were saying was it was a sack of shit. This is what their internal email showed, right?
That's right.
Which is another French movement of selling. I think it was a Belgian in France. Or no, an Italian guy in France who was selling sacks of shit. So the thing is that it was not a CDO. It was not an investment vehicle in which AAA rated that any pension fund should own. It was a sack of shit that they themselves described it when not speaking to the customer. And the central bank bought it on our behalf as if it were the thing that they
right.
sold.
So here we are 10, 15 years later, and Paul Krugman is saying, okay, we didn't prosecute the criminals, so we want to mint a $1 trillion platinum coin and believe that this has agency in this economy called the United States.
No, yes,
okay?
because
he's a product of the incest between Wall Street corruption and Washington corruption had a baby called Paul Krugman,
you're taking it so literally, Max. What I'm saying is they really genuinely believe at this point that, if I made a painting of these glasses, they aren't the glasses. I wouldn't be able to do this and see it. But they would take that painting as these are glasses, and they're saying that a $1 trillion platinum coin is the economy. It will save the economy. It will pay for our debts.
Right. And the media says it, and the bank say it, and Washington says it. You know who doesn't say it? Bitcoin.
That's right, because Bitcoin is zeros and ones.
But Bitcoin is the relative hard object around which everything is being
because Bitcoin
measured.
is money. Bitcoin fixes this. That's real. Just
Right.
because a lot of people don't understand what is real and what's not, just because they can't see that, we're basically toxic maximalism versus shitcoiners are arguing in front of this painting. This is not a pipe, whether or not it's a pipe, right?
Right. That's true. And the thing about Paul Krugman is that he used to be anxiety provoking,
Yes. Well, he still seems to be.
right? But unless you are a Bitcoiner,
Yeah.
then it's comical.
Well, ever since he's never provoked any anxiety for me, because I just always think of his 1998 quote about the internet. I'm like, well, if a guy could be so wrong about something so profound, then why would I listen to him? Like, it wasn't just a little bit wrong. It was just
I'm
like
saying
profoundly wrong.
the title of his piece is "The Most Serious Economic or Financial Consideration of Our Time." Is how he positioned this $1 trillion coin column.
Well, the exact opposite he said about the internet. It was like an absurdity that anybody would even entertain any sort of significance of this technology. It's not going to mean anything more than the facts. It won't achieve anything but the facts. So, of course, he's going to say, well, this is totally brilliant. This $1 trillion platinum coin makes so much sense. It's exact mirror opposite of what his pronouncements on an economic revolution of the internet technology.
Yeah, totally agree. But there are people in America and around the world that read his stuff and take it seriously.
There are people around the world who are about to pay $500,000 for a Hunter Biden painting. So, so what? Like that's the fiat world filled with zeros. Okay.
Well, those are no coiners.
Those are no coiners.
So those are all those
zero,
people,
zero
all those
coiners,
people who
zero,
read
zero, zero.
Paul Krugman have yet to
that.
buy Bitcoin yet.
Right. So hopefully you'll be buying Bitcoin though, and you go to swanbitcoin.com/orange pill. We've got to wrap up this episode because I don't want to get it too long, because everybody, you tune into YouTube and you go, oh, 3 hours. I'm not going to watch that. I'm going to take some other time. But we're going to talk to you over in our naked spaces. Make sure you show up, disrobe your mind, disrobe your, previous thoughts, discard all those things cloaking you from seeing the truth, and join us over on our spaces.
It's just like naked lunch.
It's like naked lunch, yes.
Well, I've never gotten into William Burroughs on this show. I think it's high time. We'll have to do that next time.
Next time.
Bye now.